Courtney Zong. I'm a student.
Hello, I'm going to ask you a few questions on standardized testing. The first question is, what are your personal views of it?
My personal views of standardized testing is I hate it.
Yeah.
Absolutely don't like standardized testing.
Do you believe it evaluates students?
It evaluates the students, but it doesn't evaluate them as to like what we learn in high school. What we do in high school, the curriculum that we study and focus on, has nothing to do with SATs or ACTs or any standardized testings.
Do you feel pressure from your parents, teachers, and fellow classmates?
My parents are more on my side. They tell me what I can do, so they don't pressure me to take the test. They just tell me to do well in school. Compared to my classmates and everybody who takes the SAT scores, they'll be like, hey, what'd you get your score? They'll be like, oh, you got 1600 or 1800. I'm just kind of like, well, I didn't do so well in it, but I'm a good student. So in a way, yes, and in a way, no, too.
Do you believe this test or any test like standardized testing will help you in the future?
I believe it will not help me at all. Because to be honest, the standardized testing is asking me questions about random things that doesn't pertain to anything in the future that I may use. Of course I use math, of course I use the reading skills and everything, but to my major that I focus on, it probably won't.
Do you believe that students with disabilities should be tested?
In a way, I do, because if they have a disability, then everyone can learn their own ways. Like, you know, then you have your visualizer, you have your just listening people, I guess. But yes, I think they should, but shouldn't be to an extent where they're like so needed. They should give like
Accommodations.
yes.
Well, thank you.
Thank you.
Go ahead.
Hi, my name is Karen Michelucci. I have 3 children in the school system. I have a daughter who's a sophomore at University of South Carolina in civil engineering. My son Hayden is a junior at Mallet Creek High School, and I have a 7th grader at Ridge Road Middle School.
Okay. Today I'm going to ask you questions about standardized testing. And the first question, what are your personal views of them?
My personal views of standardized testing, I think it's teaching to the lowest common denominator. It's trying to make the school system fit to make everybody pass, and that's almost impossible. And I think it narrows things down too much and doesn't focus on the individual learning patterns of students. So ultimately, I think it's failing the system rather than making it work the way they want it to. And I really think it would do better in the long term is to approach different avenues of education and raise the bar higher to make students strive for excellence instead of making the test the ultimate goal.
Do you believe students with disabilities should be tested?
I do, because I think people with disabilities, like my son Hayden has autism, and I think he needs to be tested because he's smart, he's just smart in a different way, and I think that's what has to be appreciated. And when he was in 6th grade, I want to say, they did a standardized test for him, and his teacher called me ahead of time and said he was going to get a 0 because he could do the work, but he did it in his head and with his fingers, and he would write down the answer. And they didn't want to see that. They wanted to see that he knew the process. And sure enough, he did the test, he got all the right answers, but he failed the standardized because he didn't conform to what they wanted it to be. And I think that's one example where they really need to look at how students learn and what the best way is to teach them to get what they want out of them.
How did you tell your child about standardized testing?
I didn't so much have to tell them because they hear about it in school themselves. And my son, who's in 7th grade, was in a panic about it because he's told this is it, like you have to pass or you have to fail. And I don't think that's true. I said it's really, this test is more how is the school succeeding, how much funding are they going to get, how well are they doing, which I really don't think is an accurate measurement. But I said for him, it's not the be all end all for you. I said there's so much more in school, there's so much more in life, so don't stress and don't let the school put stress on you for something that shouldn't be on you.
Do you believe that this test, it places a lot of pressure on your children?
Yes, like I just said, because they're like my son was told that he has to do well, and it's a pass fail basically, and he was kind of led to believe that if he doesn't do well on his test, he doesn't pass 7th grade, and I don't think that's the right thing to do.
Do you believe that any standardized tests, like ones that prepare you for college, like the SAT, prepare them for the future?
I suppose in a way they prepare you for the future. I think it's good to have some stress. You know, you need to have a little bit of stress when it comes time to get out in the real world and understand that everything isn't easy. But at the same time, I don't think that the SAT gives you an accurate snapshot of how a student learns, because, you know, my daughter, she had a GPA of 4.9 and she was salutatorian and she could barely break 2,000 on the SATs because she chokes on those tests because there's so much pressure. So she's a smart student, but that one thing doesn't demonstrate it the way it could. So I don't know. I'm very torn on that. I mean, I think the pressure and understanding that you have to compete to succeed in life is a good thing, but I don't know that it's an accurate way to gauge someone's intelligence.
All right, thank you.
Okay.
Hello, I am Ashley Newman. I am a math coach in Hillsborough County in Florida. My role is to supervise around 700 kids in an elementary school and monitor their math progress.
Okay, today I'm going to ask you some questions on standardized testing. And the first question is, what are your personal views of standardized testing?
On my personal views for standardized testing, I do believe that we need some kind of measure for student academic progress. However, I necessarily don't believe with the format of standardized testing or the frequency of the amount of testing either.
Do you believe it helps you evaluate your students?
Yes and no. Depending on the format, I believe that it does evaluate our students' progress. But if it is a completely multiple choice question given to third graders, I necessarily don't know if that teaches them how to read. It really depends on the format of the standardized testing.
Do you believe students with disabilities should be tested? This could be any disability from learning to just an average disability.
I feel students who have just a learning disability can participate in a standardized testing. If they need an accommodation, like something read to them like directions or a dictionary, then I think those should be provided to students. However, students with severe cognitive disabilities should not have to partake in standardized testing.
Do you feel like your school puts too much pressure on the amount of standardized testing?
Yes, I currently work in a school that is an underachieving academic school in the state of Florida, and we are constantly evaluating standardized tests to measure student growth for the sake of our school grade. So yes, we do put a lot of pressure on standardized testing.
Do you believe it shows the college readiness or just the future readiness of your students?
Currently, right now, for the state of Florida, our standardized testing is the FCAT measure. No, I do not believe it measures college readiness because it's mostly multiple choice, and I do not believe answering multiple choice can provide you for your future. However, if the format was changed, I do feel like it could measure if it was more performance-based.
Okay, thank you. Okay, go ahead.
I'm Vanessa Halling, and I am the Mallard Creek Testing Coordinator.
Okay, thank you for coming. What are your personal views of standardized testing?
I believe that standardized testing has a place in education. I truly do. I think that certain tests are very valid and can help students prepare for or show preparedness for the university. For example, I think the SAT test is very valid. I think that it shows in a nutshell what students know in terms of the basic required core components of education that they're going to be using when they get to university. So I think that's a very valid test. I think for the most part, I think standardized testing has a place and is valid and is valuable for education.
Do you believe students with disabilities should be tested?
I think it depends greatly upon the disability. For example, I think we have over 200 students in our school who are classified as having some form of learning disability, meaning that they either have a 504 plan or an IEP plan. And that allows them some form of testing accommodations if their paperwork, if their information shows that they need it. And in that case, I think that a student who has the disability that just allows him extended time, or he needs a few more minutes of extended time, a few more minutes of concentration time, if being in a smaller setting would help him test better, I see nothing wrong with that. I do think that there needs to be a very close attention paid to the degree of the learning disability. I think it would be not beneficial to the student in any way, shape, or form to have a meeting and say, this student would do very well with extended time, and just throw that on a student's plan. If that were to happen, I don't think that's benefiting anyone, especially the student. But if a student has a history where a need is clear and evident, and giving him that testing accommodation would help him, then by all means I'm for it. The example that I'm thinking of that is counter to that or opposes what I believe otherwise is, for example, we are required to test our Extend 1 students. We are required to test our Extend 2 students for the ACT test. The ACT test is a college admissions test, and students who are in the Extend 2 program, the Extend 1 program at our school, are not in a school program. They're in a degree program that will not give them a degree that will help them get into a college. So in that respect, that test is not helping them at all. And I feel strongly that those students should not have to take that test. I will say that until the end of time.
I didn't know they did that. That's very interesting.
Most people don't.
That's interesting. Do you feel pressure from the school to get the best standardized testing scores?
Pressure, yes and no. I mean, every school in CMS is required to test 95%. If for a test that is used to calculate our annual percentage of growth. So I don't feel that we are treated any differently from any other CMS school, but at the same time, there is pressure. For most of the tests that we have to give, the tests that I'm responsible for coordinating, we have to justify every absence. We have to account for them. So for example, this most recent ACT test, for that, like every other test in the past 3 years that I've done it, I'm looking at my print-off that shows the 11th grade enrollment, and I've highlighted the number of students that I've tested to constantly keep track of the number that we have, the percentage of testing that we've done so far for that test. And at the end of it, on March 18th, when the deadline happens, I have to send into our zone superintendent an explanation for why certain students did not take that test. So pressure, yes and no. There's certainly an accountability issue.
Do you believe it shows college or like career readiness?
From a coordinator's perspective, I can really only look at the data that I've seen for the past 3 years. And again, I think it depends greatly on the test. I think the SAT test, the ACT test, they've been used by states for years to help get kids ready for college. I think for the most part, they'll certainly show some degree of college readiness. I do. But I think also colleges have to realize that not everyone is a test taker. I wasn't a great test taker, ironically enough. I really wasn't. And I think colleges have to look at the whole person and not just that number. I think things have changed quite a bit over the past few years. It's very easy for parents and for students, even for teachers, to have this impression that that number on the SAT score report is the end-all be-all. Like that's going to determine what college you get into. I think if you were to talk to more guidance counselors, they would probably confirm that what they're hearing from more recruiters is that while that number is always going to be there and it's always going to be a requirement, it isn't necessarily the one factor that's going to determine admission for these students. I think colleges are doing a better job of looking at the student as a whole. I hope so, because I believe students are more than a number. So.
Okay, thank you so much.